The aircraft that came to the public, see?
That was
Yeah.
the plane in World War II,
Yeah, that's
particularly
right.
off me.
This is the heart of San Diego. The history of this area is told by significant San Diegans who have made and are making a difference in our community. The Heart of San Diego is brought to you by San Diego Metropolitan Uptown Examiner and Daily Business Report, and by Roll Construction Company, Spirit of an American Family.
Hello and good to see you again. I'm Fred Lewis. This is the Heart of San Diego. The history of our community is told by men and women who have made a difference in San Diego and around the world. And many of us, of course, are still making a difference who appear on this program, brought to you by our fine sponsors for 3 years, Roll Construction Company, Spirit of an American Family, and San Diego Metropolitan Magazine, and we thank them. We're here on ITV, and certainly our guest this evening, Bill Chana, has made a big difference in the aerospace industry. He's made many contributions to the flight and aerospace history of San Diego as a flight test engineer, performance and propulsion specialist, Atlas missile base manager, consultant, small craft designer, and president and board member of the San Diego Aerospace Museum. Mr. Chana came here in 1941 and has been an active San Diegan since then. Bill worked for Convair for 32 years, then for Aurora Industries, and finally as a consultant. He's received awards from the U.S. Air Force and Consolidated Vultee Aircraft Corporation. He's been a friend and confidant to some of the biggest names in aviation and aerospace, and we'll talk about some of those, Bill. It's been a great life, hasn't it?
Well, it's been really terrific. Yes, it has.
Started for you in Chicago, Illinois in 1921. Family lived in Berwyn from the time you were 3 to the time you were 18.
Right.
Tell us about the kind of kid you were.
Well, I was a skinny kid that was enjoying life, and I got involved with airplanes and model airplanes in my very young, 5 years, 6 years old.
What did you want to be?
What did I want to be? Well, you know, when you're 5 or 6 years old, you're enamored with models and so on, and you don't really realize that when you get older, you're going to be a flight test engineer or test pilot or aerospace manager. You don't realize those things at that age, but you're starting to set the path when you get involved with model airplane building and so on.
I've got a picture of you with model airplanes I'm going to show in just a moment. That this is you in the 8th grade about.
Yeah.
And what did you do for fun at that point in your life, and who are your heroes?
Well, I had several heroes at that point in time. I had Charles Lindbergh, of course, was a hero of many people, and he was my hero. And Alexander P.D. Seversky, who was a Russian aircraft designer. I built many models of the airplanes that he designed. One of the airplanes became the P-47, which was used extensively in World War II.
Well, here is Bill Chana, who is the model airplane builder, and I know Pat will take a good close-up of this one. You're probably about 12 years old at the time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yes, that was one of the models I built.
And here is a mock-up of a Seversky plane that you had done.
It's a 3-view drawing that I did in high school of the P-35 Seversky airplane. And if you look closely at that, you'll see Alexander P.D. Seversky's autograph on that, which he signed. He autographed that for me in 1972. I had the privilege of meeting him in 1969 at the Apollo 11 launch, and I couldn't believe that I was meeting the Alexander P.D. Seversky.
Well, I think I have a picture of you and Alexander P.D. Seversky.
Right.
And what a great historic shot this is, and how proud and happy you must have been with this one.
Yes, he was a fine gentleman, and I not only met him at the Apollo launch, but I met him about 3 weeks later up in Los Angeles at a conference, and we sat at the same table. That's when I talked to him about autographing the 3-view drawing that I made of one of his early airplanes.
And this, of course, is the storied plane of his that he designed was right under there.
Yeah, that's P-35 right there.
What a great, all-purpose plane that proved to be.
for the military or during the war. That's correct.
During
And then,
World
of
War
course,
II.
it became the an extension of that became the P-47, which was pretty used extensively in the war.
You graduate from high school, Morton High School
Yep.
in Berwyn, Illinois.
Cicero, Illinois.
In Cicero, that's where Al Capone hung out
Right.
about the same time you were there. And after graduating from high school, you went to Purdue University, and tell us what you were studying there.
Well, at Purdue University, I was there for just 2 years, and had some beginning classes in aero by Professor K.D. Wood, and you know, aircraft design and aircraft history. The 2 courses that I remember, and the only reason I only was at Purdue for 2 years was that I realized that I should go out and work for about a year before I go back to Purdue. So I came out.
And get your degree and find out what else you wanted to specialize in, et cetera.
Right, that's right. So I came out to San Diego because I was influenced by K.D. Wood, the professor that I had there, because he used to come to San Diego and work for Convair during the summer months. And then another person who was in my class was Isaac Ladden, who was the son of Mac Ladden, who was vice president of engineering for Convair, or for Consolidated at that time. And so they twisted my arm, showed me some beautiful pictures of San Diego, and they found out that I was thinking about working for a year, and they said, well, you better put in an application at Consolidated. So I did, and I was offered.
Consolidated eventually became Convair, of course.
Consolidated became Consolidated Balti, and then it
And
became
you got
Convair.
stuck in the middle of World War II all of a sudden as you were working there as a 20-year-old with a lot of responsibility for a 20-year-old. What were your duties as a flight engineer?
Well, as a flight test engineer, you, of course, went up on all the flights on all the airplanes. You designed the instrumentation that was in there, the special instrumentation for flight testing. And one of the first airplanes that I flew in was the XB-24, which you're showing now. And that was the very first B-24, which flew for the first time in December of 1939. So
Beautiful looking craft for its time, but it did have some flying problems if the speed got too low, didn't it? Or did you
No.
like this one?
No, this was a B-24 was a really good airplane. The only thing is that in comparison to the B-17, this airplane was so good and so efficient that it couldn't fly as high, believe it or not, as the B-17. And that was really the only thing that was wrong with it, because it could carry twice the bomb load. It could go quite a bit faster than the B-17, but because it had a high wing loading, but it had a high aspect ratio wing, it could fly comfortably at around 28,000 feet when it was loaded, and a B-17 could fly comfortably at about 30,000 feet. So that was a difference between the 2 airplanes.
Tell us what San Diego was like in World War II. A hectic city, considering we had a small town infrastructure.
Right. There was only 200,000 people in San Diego when I came to work at Consolidated. And there were, and of course I remember, like everybody remembers, the netting that was over the factory. So and also the airport was painted like a city, so that unless you were familiar with the airport and you flew over it, you wouldn't think it was an airport.
Lots of camouflage and protective balloons.
Right, that's right, yeah. So anyway, it was, and then I can remember driving around at night. You had to have your dim lights on. You couldn't have any bright lights. And
all this must have been quite exciting for a 20 to 22 to 23 and 24-year-old young man during World War II.
Right.
Here in San Diego. You had a bad accident, though, in 1943, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. On May 10th of 1943, I was a flight test engineer on an airplane called a heavy bomber, a B-36 bomber, and we went down the runway, but we didn't take off, and so we went right into the Marine base, and we killed 3 Marines, and our pilot was killed, and there were 5 of us who survived.
That was quite a story at the time, and another test pilot, a friend of yours, was killed flying over the Civic Center and went into the water.
That was Chuck Richburg was flying the Sea Dart on a high-speed pass over the bay, and the airplane came apart at the time that he was at very, very high speed. And although they got to him right away, he did die from internal injuries. And
That changed some of the rules about flying around San Diego, didn't it, during World War II, where a plane could fly during a test and couldn't? Didn't
Well,
they move them out a little further to sea at that time?
No, I don't think there was any change as a result of that. Now that was in '54, so that accident.
Okay.
So that was after the war.
I thought it happened a little
No,
earlier.
it was in '54.
Yeah,
It
the
was a
Sea
major-
Dart, of course, was a later plane.
Yeah,
yes.
the later Sea plane. It was an airplane that operated off of water skis. It had its own water skis, and it did go supersonic. And so we talked about the Sea Dart as being the only supersonic fighter airplane there ever was, or a supersonic seaplane there ever was.
By this time, you were confirmed San Diegan, and World War II is coming to a close. What are some of the other planes that you worked with and some of the people? I'm going to start showing some pictures.
Okay, well, a very good friend of mine who's now deceased was Phil Prophet. In fact, both of those men on there are deceased, other than the one in the middle, who happens to be me. But this was the crew of a test that we did for Convair in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I was back there for almost a year, and we tested an airplane called a torpedo bomber. And Phil Prophet was the pilot, and Larry Phillips and I were the flight test engineers. And
You dabbled with a group of other guys in small plane design,
Yeah.
and for many years you had the smallest plane, and I'm going to get it there, my head, and this made
Yeah.
newsreels all over the world,
That's right.
this
It was
little B plane.
newsreels and magazines, and
As you can see, is that you, Bill?
that's me. That's right.
It's laying stretched out on, what did the plane weigh?
It weighed 170 pounds empty. Right. And that's above Montgomery Field at about 2,000 feet.
Isn't that an amazing shot? How much time did you devote to it? I mean, to to this kind of design and hobby. I have to call it a hobby.
Yes, it was a hobby, and we the three of us that built that airplane, of course, we worked weekends, except for Sunday. We didn't work on Sunday, but we worked 2 or 3 times a night. And this is the second airplane that we built was the Honeybee, which you've also got a picture of here
Yeah, I'm
somewhere.
gonna
But anyway,
pick it up.
this is when we got a type certificate from the FAA, which was very unusual for people who were building what we'd call a home-built airplane to get that type certificated. And this is back in 1953. And an interesting story here, if I may, and that is that the FAA called me up and said, say, you guys have gotten your type certificate and we want to come down and give it to you. And this was around the first week in December. And I asked them, I says, can you delay that to December 17th and come down? And they said, well, what do you want to do that for? Well, I said, December 17th of '53 is the 50th anniversary of powered flight. And I said, I think I'd like to have our certificate dated December
goodness.
17th, and it is. And they came down on December 17th in 1953 and presented us with the certificate.
Bill, hang on a second. This is the story of Bill Chana, a fascinating story of the aerospace business and industry here in San Diego. He, of course, is a past president of our museum, which honors flight in San Diego, the Aerospace Museum. And this interesting story will continue after I thank our sponsors again, and they are, of course, Roll Construction Company, Spirit of an American Family, for more than 80 years, they've been with us for 3 years, as has San Diego Metropolitan Magazine. Kevin Elliott and Gary Shaw and all the people that work with them have just been super, super people. You eventually went into missiles, kiddo.
Right. Yes, I suddenly found myself working on the Atlas missile, and my wife and I and family moved to Spokane, Washington, and I was the base manager putting in the Atlas missile, operational missile around Spokane, of which there were 9 sites like the one that you're looking at right now. And the interesting thing about this is that we were the first base to come in on schedule, which made the Air Force really happy. And we were also the first base to complete the base without a lost time accident or without a missile accident.
Well, there
So
was a model of this Atlas, of course, parked right in front of Astronautics.
Right, and that
Kearny
missile,
Mesa.
well, that missile now, you know, is at our aerospace annex out at Gillespie Field. That same missile.
Around that time, of course, you went into the Aerospace Museum, and that would be about 1963 when it opened.
Right.
And you were a big part of it at the beginning and right until today.
Well, when the museum first opened up in February 15th of 1963, there were only 5 airplanes in the museum, and 3 of them were mine. So that's...
Well, that
So
shows
I've been
the big,
involved since 1963 with the
big part
museum.
you played. Tell us in about 30 seconds the importance of Atlas and Atlas Centaur to our space program right out of San Diego and, of course, out of Convair. A lot of people have forgotten, I believe.
Yes, I think they have you know, we have a astronaut in San Diego that flew on the Atlas, and that's Wally Schirra, good friend of ours, and he and a member of the San Diego Aerospace Museum. And well, it was a great step forward for that. If we didn't have the Atlas, we'd have been farther behind with getting men in space, men in orbit.
Was a tremendous program right out of San Diego, and I'm going to show some really internationally known people. This is Jimmy Doolittle, of course, with the big raid off the carrier to Tokyo, mission over Tokyo, and he's visiting the Aerospace Museum there, the kind of guy he is.
Yeah.
Tell us.
Oh, well, he had quite a life in aviation, that's for sure, and he lived to be, I think, about 94.
World War II ace.
World War II.
Excuse me, World War I ace,
Yes,
and then
and World War II commander.
hero, and this is another character, Howard Hughes.
Howard Hughes, yeah. I spent 4 hours with Howard Hughes one evening when my boss said, show this man around, show him that Convair 240 on the floor. And so we spent about an hour and a half looking at that airplane, and then he said, well, let's go eat. And so the only place I knew of at that time was to go to the Lindbergh Field, Lindbergh Field stand-up bar, which is when the terminal was on Pacific Highway.
Of course.
And we had to order a sandwich and some milk, and finally he says, no, can't we find something better than this? And I was almost at a loss because I was not too familiar with eating places. But right across the street on Pacific Highway and Laurel, there was a drive-in restaurant which you could also go inside and sit down. So we went there. He was happy with that. And then I thought I was going to take him back to his airplane and he'd head back up to Los Angeles. But he said, no, I want to take a look at that airplane some more. So we spent another hour or so looking at the Convair 240. He didn't buy that airplane, but he eventually bought a Convair 240.
Now, this is another one of your heroes, one of the world's heroes, and I think he went to Purdue also.
Yes, he did. Yeah, Neil Armstrong, right. And we have that picture of an astronaut on the moon with that flag, and I always like to take a picture of myself and some famous person like Neil Armstrong and say that there we are, I was on the moon with Neil Armstrong.
Kind of a guy Neil is.
Great person, great person. I haven't run across an astronaut yet that isn't a great person.
Here's a Lindbergh.
Yes, Eric Lindbergh. He's the grandson of Charles Lindbergh. And that picture is taken at the National Air and Space Museum in 1998 when I was back there for 6 months on a fellowship. And Eric came through, and I gave him a tour of the museum. I was really surprised to hear him say that he had never been to the museum, he had never seen his grandfather's airplane, and so it was a thrill to show him that airplane.
Bill has written a book about the things that we're talking about here. Our guest is Bill Chana, who's a real historian insofar as San Diego is concerned and the aerospace industry, and it's called Roger, Over and Out, and you'll be able to find it at various places by contacting the Aerospace Museum. That's a good place to get the book, I think.
They can start there, yes. It'll be published in about 6 months or so.
And he recounts all of his experiences. What kind of guy was Chuck Yeager?
Oh, a great guy, and one of the finest test pilots I've ever had an opportunity to meet. I worked with him very closely on testing the XF-92, the first Delta wing, and he was just absolutely tops. I don't think I've ever seen a better, well, as an Air Force test pilot testing fighter aircraft. Now, we had a lot of great pilots at Convair testing bombers, but when it came around to testing fighters, Yeager was tops.
Here's Mr. Russell.
Yeah, Mark Russell.
Character?
Yeah, I got to meet him a couple years ago, back in Washington.
The next picture I'm going to show must have been a thrill to meet this lady, and that is one of the relatives of the Wright brothers. And she has a lot of memorabilia, and I thought this was a museum when I first saw the picture, but this is her home.
This is in her home. My wife and I visited her and her husband at her home. She was about 90 years old when that picture was taken, and she lived to about 95. And she is a niece of the Wright brothers. Her father was one of the Wright brothers' brothers.
Aerospace Museum has given you a great deal of pleasure, and how far has the museum come in the last 30 years?
Oh, man. The museum has expanded and continues to expand and continues to change and continues to add. And one thing I want to say is that one of the things that happens at the museum that is hard to believe, we have 275 volunteers at that museum. And we have volunteers in the restoration shop that are over 90 years old. And so, and they're all just dedicated as can be. Let's see.
Oh, here's a couple of the volunteers.
Yeah,
you
right.
can talk about these guys.
Yeah, if you look closely, you're looking at the engine, the 1903 Wright Brothers engine.
Replicated,
built. That the volunteers in the museum built. And that's myself in the center, but the men on the left and right, I don't call them by their regular name. I call them Orville and Wilbur. And I know they feel like Orville and Wilbur when they're building that engine. And we run that. That engine is runnable, and we run it every year out at the Gillespie Field.
That's amazing. This congressman meant a great deal to San Diego, and,
right.
And of course the aerospace business. And that's Bob Wilson in his later years, and he was on this program, and he's certainly been one of San Diego's heroes.
Right. And
he's in the middle with Bill Chana. And who's the other guy?
Tom Sullivan.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Tom Sullivan was, he's now deceased, and so is Bob, deceased. But Tom was a great advocate of what I'm an advocate of, and that is a tilt wing type of a vertical takeoff and landing airplane. And
I'm going to show a picture of that right
yeah,
now.
this is a model that shows the wings level at the top, 2 frames, and at the bottom it shows the wing in a tilted position, which allows you to take off vertically and land vertically. And this is not a dream airplane, this is a dream model, but the airplane was very well tested. It was a Canadair CL-84 airplane built by General Dynamics Canadair in Canada, and a very successful vertical takeoff and landing airplane.
Well, this is where your head is, Bill Chana, and you're still consulting on projects like this.
Yes, that's right.
Can you give me 30 seconds on the future of air travel as you see it, the kind of things that we will have along with this vertical takeoff thing?
Yeah, well, you know, I like to say that it's almost impossible to predict the future. You're always wrong. I just wish that I could come back 100 years from now and see where we are. But a vertical takeoff is going to come. It's here now, but for
things will get more exciting, won't they?
Yep, I won't be here to see them, but they'll.
Do you see people on Mars? You know, Americans on Mars.
Absolutely, there are going to be people on Mars. Sure.
That's quite a trip.
Yes.
Here's a young woman who's made a name for herself.
Yeah, Eileen Collins. She's the first woman commander of the space shuttle. And we met her back at this Forest of Friendship back in Atchison, Kansas, and Atchison, Kansas is where Amelia Earhart was born and was brought up in her early years.
Bill Chana, what was San Diego when you got here in 1941? What are we today, briefly, and what should we be tomorrow in the aerospace industry and as a community?
Well, I think when I got here, when I came here in 1941, of course, it was only 200,000 population. Now it's over 2 million. A lot of difference. We live in Pacific Beach, and we find that it's getting more crowded there too. But what it's going to be another 20, 30, 40 years from now, people are continue to find out how great this city is and how great the climate is. And so anyway, that's I think where we're headed in the future.
How important is a bigger airport for San Diego?
Very important. Not because we're going to become a stepping off place for foreign lands. It's just that we need a double runway. We can't have a double runway at Lindbergh Field. I don't know.
Not even with Marine Land?
Marine Land, yeah. I'm not Oh, with Marineland. Well, I think that, you know, I worked with Manchester and with Roger Hitchcock when they were really concerned and trying to get into the, show people that the place for the airport was the center of our populace, and our center of our populace, you know, is Miramar Naval Air Station.
Yes.
But maybe the military, the government will say, maybe you can have it back, because we once had Miramar, but I mean the city did. But
Bill, quick questions, quick answers. Who are you?
who am I? Well, I like to think of myself as a loving husband and a loving father of 3 beautiful girls and 3 beautiful grandchildren, and I like to think that I'm volunteering in aerospace now at this age.
Why is it important to give back to aerospace and give back to this community?
Well, I think if you spent as many years in aerospace as I have, and finally with the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics and with the museum and all that, you've got to give some of that back. And one thing you got to do is get children involved. I've recently given talks and given them to the GATE program at the Kellogg School in Chula Vista. Wonderful kids. Anyway, getting kids involved is important.
Bill, the most impressive person you've ever met?
Well, I think Chuck Yeager, Howard Hughes, you know, and P.D. Seversky. Those are some of my heroes, and I did meet them all. It was just a handshake with Lindbergh, but I did meet them all.
What turns you on?
What turns me on? Today, at my age, oh, I like to see things really happening at the Aerospace Museum. I think we've got a great future there, and more people should come by. It's that big education center.
It's a wonderful museum.
It's an education center.
2 quick questions. What do you deeply believe in?
Do I believe in? Well, I don't. Let's see. I believe that we can't predict the future. I already said that, and that kind of sums it up.
How do you want folks to remember you in 10 seconds, please?
Well, like I said, I hope they can remember me as someone that had a great family, great grandkids, and so on, and that I was involved with Aerospace Museum and other technical societies and so on.
His name is Bill Chana, and he has been involved, and he's a great guy, and I'm Fred Lewis. For Roll Construction for San Diego Metropolitan Magazine here on ITV, we'll see you soon right here on the heart of San Diego.
Videotapes of this program are available to schools and colleges, and to you, the viewer, by calling San Diego Metropolitan at 619-233-4060. The Heart of San Diego is brought to you by San Diego Metropolitan Uptown Examiner and Daily Business Report, San Diego's largest circulation business publication, and by Roll Construction Company, Spirit of an American Family.